We're back today, like I promised, because Golden State and Houston had to take so long to finish their series, and we had to wait an extra day. But today, we're talking to you about the Golden State Warriors versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Whoever wins this series will move on to the Western Conference Final. Now, let's start before we break down the series, recapping what happened in the first round. And we'll start with the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Los Angeles Lakers. And in this series, in the first round, it was marked by Minnesota and their fantastic isolation defense against LeBron James, who only shot 40% in isolation, and Luka Doncic, who only shot 41% in isolation. This also includes forcing Luka into 4 turnovers per game and LeBron into almost 3 turnovers per game. This also led to Minnesota forcing the Lakers team into the 3rd most turnovers in the playoffs. Rudy Gobert dominated the post with 10 rebounds a game in under 30 minutes per game, and that includes a 20-point and 20 rebound game in Game 5, becoming the first Timberwolves player in the history of their franchise to achieve that stat line. I'm sorry, Kevin Garnett. The Timberwolves also dominated the offensive glass by leading all teams in the first round of the playoffs by grabbing 37% of their initial misses in converting them into second chance opportunities. Although everyone's on the Lakers' head for their lack of defense in the first round against the Timberwolves, the Lakers actually shot better than Minnesota in the series. For me, this series came down to the Lakers' inability to protect the basketball and not turn it over, their inability to get rebounds, allowing Minnesota to grab offensive rebounds, thus allowing Minnesota another chance to score, and their inability to change their offensive game plan when it was clear since game 1 that Minnesota planned to stop Luka and LeBron's isolation game. Now, let's recap the longest series of my entire life, the Warriors and the Rockets. If you remember, we picked the Warriors to win this series. They pulled it out in 7 games, albeit with injuries to Jimmy Butler, who had a terrifying fall in Game 2, suffering a pelvic contusion, Steph Curry playing with a hurt thumb, Jonathan Kuminga missing a game, and the Warriors' best perimeter defender, Gary Payton II, missing Game 7. The Rockets' size kept them in this series as, like Minnesota, they dominated the rebounding in this series against the Warriors with their big size advantage. The Rockets averaged the most offensive rebounds and the 3rd most defensive rebounds in round 1. This was null and void though, as Houston was 6th in turnovers per game in the first round, with only Denver being the only team ranked that low in the first round of the playoffs to make it to the second round. Another downfall for Houston was their inability to make free throws. They got to the line the most out of any team in the playoffs in the first round, but only made 70% of their free throws, which was the 3rd worst. To go along with the Warriors forcing the 6th most turnovers, they were 4th in steal. This led to equalizing the Rockets' huge offensive rebounding advantage and actually led to Golden State getting more shot attempts per game than Houston. So now, let's break down the Timberwolves taking on the Golden State Warriors to see who goes to the Western Conference Final. Now, if you paid attention to the NBA all season, you know the Warriors won this season series 3-1 against Minnesota. But all 4 of those games were played before the Warriors traded for Mr. Himmy Buckets, aka Jimmy Butler. If you remember our first round breakdown of the Warriors and the Rockets series, you'd remember that we told you the Warriors' interior offense and defense have improved to top 10 in the entire NBA since the Warriors traded for Hemi buckets. The Warriors shot very well against Minnesota this season, as well as forcing turnovers, getting steals, and even out rebounding the Timberwolves. But these games were before Jimmy Butler was in Golden State. Although the Warriors have been better in the paint offensively and defensively, they've also gotten a lot smaller with starting Draymond Green at center, who is 6'6", and he will be matched up with 7'1" Rudy Gobert. And to also go into that fact, the Warriors actually saw a decrease in rebounding numbers since the lineup change after getting Jimmy Butler. Like we also talked about in breaking down the first round series, Golden State is a big off-screen shooting team. They struggled to make those shots this season without the plethora of shooters they've had in the past, like Klay Thompson, and Houston was one of the best in the NBA at defending those shots. But Minnesota is near the bottom of the NBA defending off-screen shooters. This could be scary for Minnesota, as Golden State was third in field goal percent in off-screen shots in the first round against Houston's great off-screen defense. Minnesota also showed that they're still struggling defending those type of plays and shots, as they allowed the Lakers to shoot 63% on off-screen shots. The good for Minnesota is Golden State also likes finding open shooters for spot-up shots, where Minnesota was the third best in the NBA during the season at defending spot-up shooters. Although Minnesota was the fifth worst at defending that shot in the first round against the Lakers. But how much of that was Minnesota just knowing if they stopped Luka and LeBron's isolation, everything else would fall in line? Golden State will be facing a top isolation offense in Minnesota, obviously led by Anthony Edwards, who runs isolation 20% of the time in the regular season, and he actually saw a bump in that number in the first round of the playoffs, running isolation 39% of the time he had the ball. But Edwards is actually middle of the pack in the NBA during the regular season at finishing isolation plays, all of layups, floaters, jump shots, whatever. The thing that Anthony Edwards' isolation does, though, for Minnesota is it forces the defense to collapse on Anthony Edwards, leaving guys open, which is why Minnesota finishes one of the best spot-up shooting teams in the NBA this season. This is a spot where Golden State struggles to defend. Golden State was the fifth worst defense all season against spot-up shooters. Golden State, though, was also a top 3 defense against isolation players. But will that matter if they can't defend the kickouts in isolation to Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, Mike Conley, and Jalen Clark, who all took over 30% of their shot attempts from spot-up shots? Let's also note, of those players, DiVincenzo, Clark, and Conley were among the best in the NBA at taking these shots too. All three finishing in the top 75th percentile among all NBA players this season in making spot-up shots. So in the end, I'm going to take Minnesota because of their ability to rest, while Golden State just went 7 games with Houston, not blowouts, mind you, tight games. Minnesota's size, which we saw them use greatly against the Lakers, and Golden State's inability to stop what I believe is the main cog in Minnesota's game plan. And Minnesota will go on to the Western Conference Finals. And how fun will that be if we get Oklahoma City against Minnesota? No Lakers, no Clippers, no Mavericks, no big city team. A small city, in my opinion, is making it to the NBA Finals, as I have 2 small cities making it to the Western Conference Finals. Now I gotta leave it up to you guys and comment below how many games do you think this series is going, and do you think Golden State will prove me wrong? Will their experience with Steph Curry and Draymond Green making it to the NBA Finals so many times, winning rings so many times, prove to beat out Minnesota and get them to the Western Conference Finals like we saw in round one against Houston, where their experience in game sevens got them here? Let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned for that baseball video coming out in a couple days. And I know everyone's ready. We're itching already. We're bringing you some fantasy football also. Thank you for watching. Peace out.